When the first time you fall in love leads to heartbreak, and you find yourself standing once again at the point of no return, the emotions can be overwhelming, because this time, you know exactly what love can cost. The first time I fell in love, it ended in heartbreak, and yet, here I was again, standing at the edge of something life-altering. When I realized that I was in love with Corey, I remember the feeling well. It was joy, but it was joy wrapped in the memory of everything I'd lost, as well as the realization of God's answers to my prayers. Every time fear rose up, the hard-won lesson I'd learned about surrender became my lifeline. Lord, are you in this? Show me. Give me permission to move forward or close the door. And because I kept asking, I kept receiving answers. When each moment of joy arrived, I could receive it fully, not guarded, not bracing for impact, but openly, as confirmation. I didn't have to hold my heart back from what God was choosing, but love, even God-led love, doesn't unfold without being tested. As Corey and I moved forward together, what stretched out before us wasn't just a romance. It was a series of summits, moments that felt like milestones, and a little like make it or break it thresholds. Each one carried weight. Each one asked the same quiet question: is this blessed? And with each yes from God, we kept climbing. Well, with love declared between Corey and me, it became clear we were moving toward marriage. We could picture doing life together. More than that, being near each other brought intense joy. One of my favorite anecdotal memories from that time was this. Anytime Corey saw me, after we'd been apart for any length of time, he would get this absolutely intoxicating smile on his face, like he completely adored me. And he would say, every single time, there she is. Every time he said it, every time he looked at me like that, I loved him a little more. I had never known happiness like that. To be looked at by a man as though you're precious to him, like his heart rests and brightens in your presence, ignites a kind of trust and joy I can scarcely describe. It hadn't been that long that we'd even known each other, but because of our long conversations and the intentional care that Corey took to truly get to know me, and in turn to let me know him deeply, we reached a point about 6 to 8 weeks after our first meeting where Corey felt that it was the appropriate time for me to meet his children. This was a huge milestone, and something else mattered to me here too. Without prompting, just before that first meeting, Corey respectfully informed his ex-wife that he was seeing someone seriously, and that he felt it was time to introduce the children. That proper, honorable step spoke straight to my heart. It showed me the kind of man he was: careful, truthful, and trustworthy. I was nervous for the children's approval, but mostly I was excited. I'd been blessed with a nurturing mother who had handed down that nurturing heart to me. Therefore, loving children that weren't biologically mine was not a difficult concept. And loving Corey's children, because I loved him, was something I knew would come naturally. I still remember arriving at the indoor play park. Corey and the children approached Esther and me, and Esther was bursting with excitement. I'd shown her pictures, and like me, she was anticipating the joy of making friends with Corey's crew. Corey and I had decided we would be cautious in how I was introduced, to protect their hearts and give them time to develop their own feelings without pressure. I would simply be Dad's special friend. We also planned to be careful about displays of romantic affection, because the children didn't need to confront a flood of conflicting emotions while they were just trying to get to know Esther and me. Of course, Children are intuitive. They likely knew I was the girlfriend, but I agreed completely. They didn't need to process too much too fast. Corey had been divorced for 1.5 years by this point, and I was sensitive to the fact that adjustment to seeing their father affectionate towards someone who wasn't their mother would take time. Even when handled carefully, it can stir grief, loyalty tension, and confusion. I wanted them to learn first that I am safe. I care about you, and I'm not here to take something from you. It was his 5-year-old daughter who approached first, with boldness and innocence. For privacy, we'll call her Ellie. Ellie had no filter. She was excited to meet us, and I remember kneeling down right away to talk to her. Getting down to eye level with a child matters. It communicates, I see you. You are a whole person, and you deserve respect. Well, then the boys chimed in too, following their sister's lead. Teddy was 4, Michael was 7, Kane was 10, Ellie was still 5, turning 6 soon. These were tender ages. I remember thinking even then, this was going to require prayer, wisdom, and attentive turning toward the Lord if we were going to care for their hearts properly, while we discovered whether we were truly suited to become a family. Well, that day was amazing. Corey and I played with the children and focused on their fun. Of course, we had a blast too. I remember seeing their little personalities come out, and I felt so honored being invited into this part of Corey, this huge piece of his heart. Well, Esther connected easily with them, as I knew she would. They were comfortable with her, and watching that unfold felt like yet another yes from God. My memory gets fuzzy on the details, but I believe we went back to Corey's home afterward. I do believe I remember everyone was having such a good time that we stayed together until Esther and I had to go home to bed. That first meeting was truly blessed, and it did something huge for Corey and me. It meant we could begin envisioning family life, because now we could schedule activities that were truly family activities. I remember observing Corey in full father mode and being more than a little impressed. His children truly loved him. They loved his attentive presence, and he seemed to know exactly how to respond to each one. I remember noticing something that humbled me when we were out at a park or somewhere similar. He somehow knew where all 4 of them were at all times. I had 1 child and could be a bit of a hovercraft parent. He had 4 tenacious little monkeys and never looked flustered. I remember thinking, will I ever measure up? Will I ever be natural at this? I had always dreamed of having a big family, but in this case, I wouldn't have time to acclimate 1 child at a time the way traditional families do. For me, it would go from 1 to 5 overnight. Even then, I understood something important. If I became Corey's wife, I would need to intentionally love these children and value them deeply, while also being careful not to try to become more than I was meant to be. I wasn't their mother. I would be their stepmother. I would need to know what that identity meant. In blended families, loving well requires both warmth and restraint, affection without possession. There were so many sweet moments that reassured me the ability to love on both sides, mine and the children's, was clearly present. I got attached quickly. So did Esther, and amazingly, so did the children. I remember one evening, after a long day together, I was helping with bedtime. I sat on the bedroom floor while Corey tucked in the boys, and I sang some praise and worship songs to settle them. Michael, whose heart is one of the softest I've ever known, looked at me and said, "You're going to be the best stepmother in the world." I saw Corey smile when he said it. It warmed my heart beyond words. That bonding between the children and between Esther and me felt like more confirmation. It also gave Corey something I could sense that he had been longing for, that whole family feeling. And as the weeks went on, I remember adjusting to new concepts, sibling rivalry, and the needs of the littles compared to the older ones, the reality of an almost always noisy household. And honestly, I loved it. Corey and I talked a lot about parenting, and honestly, we aligned on most things, especially the important things. Around this time, Corey introduced me to his church care group. They were wonderful. I loved them almost immediately, and I felt a sense of belonging with them easily. You can tell a lot about a man by the company he keeps. And this circle wasn't just welcoming, it was healthy. Their presence in Corey's life made a future with him feel even more blessed, especially because they were so very caring of us as a couple, supporting our unity in any way they could. They seemed genuinely excited about me. Corey also had a best friend that he'd met through divorce care. When Corey first told me how close he was with his best friend, I had an internal moment of panic because of my past trauma with Dawn. But once I met Luke, all fragments of worry vanished. In fact, I felt relieved and even grateful that Corey had a male friend that he could debrief with, laugh with, and get wise perspective from. After what I'd walked through, a healthy male friendship felt like a breath of fresh air. And I liked Luke. He was funny, perceptive, and sincere. When he was over, especially with the kids around, and even without the kids, he just brought an element of humor and fun. I actually remember we were both comforted by his presence when he was over for coffee or games night, and that was more confirmation. The one challenge we continued bringing to the Lord as we continued the journey toward unity was church. Corey had asked me where I was at with church, and I had honestly told him how protective I was about where I was attending and my ability to continue attending there. And Corey clearly had attachment to where he was attending, but given the history I'd been through and how I'd shared it with Corey, and given his history, neither one of us wanted to take something away from the other, and so we combined our efforts. The two church attendance plans sometimes felt heavy, but the children needed time to adjust to the fact that if we became a family, both churches would be a part of our lives. We chose this path so that no one would feel a sense of loss unnecessarily. We didn't know if it was the perfect method. After all, divorce and remarriage is not in God's design, but it was what we believed all hearts could accept. We were unified in loving the Lord and in seeking Him together. That was the comfort. Well, around this same season, my family became very vocal about something. It was time for Corey to meet them, and I will always remember how tender that milestone felt. Not because I worried about Corey, but because my marriage to Sam and Sam's breakdown in relationship with my parents had hurt them deeply. So, even though I trusted Corey completely, the whole meeting the parents moment stirred old apprehension in me. And when Corey asked what I anticipated my parents would feel toward him, I shared carefully, enough to give him context without burdening him. I told him that my mother would be warm in spite of past hurts. My father would be quiet and observant but kind, and my sister would be easy to get to know. Well, Corey admitted he was nervous, and he told me why. Because he was already so attached to me. My family's blessing mattered to him, and that tenderness, his sincerity, continued to deepen my love for him. We planned a roast beef dinner at my apartment. My mother and I prepared the meal, enjoying the excitement of it all. My dad sat reading until Corey arrived, and my sister was working. She would be arriving late. Esther, of course, was helping make the meal. While the greetings were warm and conversation flowed easily, there was even some teasing that made everything feel lighter. Corey was wonderful, and I could tell there was relief on both sides that everything was so easy and pleasant. Afterward, my father told me that he could see that Corey was a very good man. Gentle, humble, genuine. He told me he could see how much Corey cared for me, and that it was a long-awaited breath of fresh air. And my mother loved Corey. I knew she would. She told me, smiling, "He just adores you, and that makes me love him." That observation from her still makes me smile. My mother was right. I had never experienced being so purely adored. There was no sense of Corey holding back. It was a blissful reality. That kind of love taught my heart to rest, to trust, to lean in. It began to teach me how to receive love without bracing for impact. And that prayer I had prayed, asking the Lord to place unreserved love in my heart for his choice, that was happening. It felt like remnants of my past were falling away with every look, every embrace, every kiss from this man who felt like he had dropped into my life from heaven. Well, I have to share this. So, one of the sweetest parts of our courtship was sharing love songs. It started when Corey told me one day that hearing love songs felt different now, because for the first time he had that heart-pounding love in real life. So every time a love song amplified his feelings, he sent it to me, and I reciprocated, and we started building a playlist together. I remember one evening, a very cinematic, romantic moment, when we listened to that playlist by candlelight, sitting on my couch, our arms around each other, talking quietly and simply enjoying the sweetness of being together. Well, it was around this time that Corey also brought up something that deeply mattered to him. He had told his ex-wife about me before I met his children, partly because she needed to know that someone new might enter their life, but also as a courtesy to me, to make it clear that his heart had moved forward. Now, he asked me,
"Have you told Sam about me?"
He wanted Sam to be made aware for two reasons. First, that another man was entering Esther's life in a significant way, and second, that my own heart had moved forward. At the time, I hesitated. I knew Sam well enough to sense how he might react. My instinct told me that announcing a new relationship could provoke conflict, and part of me hoped to delay that storm a little while longer. I told Corey honestly that I had not said anything yet, and I tried to reassure him that a good part of the reason was because Sam had been very absent lately. And I did further explain my reasoning, that with certain personalities, the wisest thing is to not poke the bear. But Corey struggled with that. Not because he was suspicious or upset with me. He wasn't. It was because something about it felt unfinished to him.
"It's just a ticky box that we can't check off yet,"
he said gently.
"And it's one that matters to me."
For Corey, it wasn't about controlling Sam's reaction. It was about integrity, about making sure our relationship stood openly in the light. He had already told Noelle, and in his mind, there was a right way to move forward when two people were building a future together. And so, after some thought, I chose to honor what mattered to him. I told Sam And unfortunately, the reaction I had quietly anticipated came almost immediately. After 9 months of absolute radio silence, Sam suddenly demanded to see Esther and began initiating legal steps toward more custody. There wasn't carefulness toward Esther. There wasn't gentleness toward me. There was aggressive assertion, as if he needed to reinsert himself into the picture. And in that moment, Corey finally understood the instinct that had made me hesitate. But it revealed something important about us too. Corey wanted our love to be built on honesty and openness, and I had learned to read danger when it approached. We were learning something deeper than either of us realized at the time: how to protect each other. Corey learned that I was true in my love for him, loyal to him as the man in my life, and willing to care about what mattered to him. And I learned that Corey was a man of integrity, who wanted it clearly established that he was the one committing to me. When things with Sam escalated in ways that worried and stressed me, Corey was right by my side, praying with me, but also helping me establish the boundaries I needed. Corey was someone I could emotionally lean into, and he protected my heart through the process of communicating with Sam. Well, with that ticky box checked, we had weathered our first real challenge together. And all of these milestones continued to prove to our hearts that God had matched us well, that He was leading us closer. While the children were growing attached, and slowly Corey and I realized that we could in fact tell them we were more than just friends. We told them carefully and gently that we loved each other, and that we were doing a lot of getting to know everyone in each other's lives to determine if in fact we were truly a match. And what surprised me was the children's response. They were excited, very excited. They began asking us when we would get married. We answered honestly that we didn't know yet, but that we would tell them as soon as we knew. While we continued delving further into one another's lives, friends, rhythms, family traditions, and the reality of what it would mean to blend everything. One evening, at my apartment after a movie night, Corey told me something plainly. He was sure that I was the one for him. He had no doubt. What he wanted to be sure of was timing, especially where all the children were concerned. I told him that I completely understood. I also told him honestly that I knew he was the one for me. Of that, I had no doubt. But I didn't have the timing answer either. I did tell him I had no fears about how fast things had progressed, because at this point, I honestly didn't. In fact, for me, holding back was what felt difficult. By this point, we had only been seeing each other about 9 weeks. This wasn't a lot of time, but we recognized one of the reasons we likely felt so certain about each other. This wasn't our first rodeo. We weren't in our early 20s. We had children, we had scars, and so we were sober-minded about love. I was 36 and Corey was 42. Well, that night, we started talking about a wedding, what that might look like. And it was surprisingly joyful to discover that we agreed on so much. But I also noticed something in myself. Impatience was rising. I had to laugh at myself and then bring it back to the Lord. If God was doing this, then the timing was in His hands too. Well, Corey and I were finding it increasingly difficult to be parted at night, and so were the children. When the children were with Corey, Esther and I would join them at his home, and we began joining their night game tradition. Esther was thrilled to experience that kind of family joy. Corey and I both felt the sweetness of giving the kids something simple but sacred. togetherness. Well, it was around this time that we realized it was time for me to meet Corey's parents. Since we both felt that engagement might be fast approaching, this felt like the last summit on our list. Corey arranged an evening tea at their home. I remember nervously trying to find something to wear. I didn't like anything in my closet, so I went shopping, and I found an outfit that said put together, modest, and pretty. Corey picked me up. Esther stayed at my parents' house with them and my sister. When I got in the car, Corey asked if I was nervous, and I said that yes, I was. He told me a bit more about each of his parents, and honestly, it helped. And truly, I needn't have worried. I was warmly welcomed. Corey's parents were easy to talk to. Their home was lovely, a traditional grandparent-style home, and we got comfortable with tea and dessert and talked easily. They're German and Swiss. I'm mostly German, so that cultural sense of belonging was strangely comforting. It felt familiar in a way that I hadn't expected, and my heart warmed through the whole visit. The sweetest part came later. As we arrived back at my apartment, Corey's father texted him to say how happy they were to have met me, and how they felt that I was something special, and that they were excited to see him happy. And with that stamp of approval, we had mounted the last summit. We were elated. That night felt covered with warmth, blessing, and peace. Well, later, Corey would tell me that he sought counsel from Luke around this time, asking how soon was too soon to get engaged. Luke offered calm, wise perspective, and Corey received it. You may be wondering if we had even had our first argument yet. Yes, we had. It wasn't major, but it was enough to reveal how we each operated when we were unhappy. I don't remember what it was about, but I remember the tension. I remember that it touched past scars in both of us, and I remember that we talked through it. For me, the disconnect felt intense. Fear of losing love permanently can have a chokehold when you've been through what I've been through. I learned that under stress, Corey retreats into quiet to process. And because of my own scars, that felt frightening to me at first. But when we were able to talk, his compassion was evident and it was healing. That moment gave us the opportunity to touch fragile places in each other and find a way through. I learned to give Corey time to process, and I learned he was stable, trustworthy, and loving. And Corey learned that I needed tenderness. He was very good at discovering what I needed and becoming that. Well, we were getting in the habit of family outings, and I will never forget this one. A few days before, Esther and I had taken Ellie shopping and found matching dresses for the two of them, and they were very excited to wear them on this particular day. This was the day that we planned to go to the circus. It was shaping up to be a warm and sunny day in May, and we headed to Corey's. I still remember arriving that day. Esther rushed inside, and Corey stood at the door smiling, that magical smile in my direction. "There she is," he said softly. I smiled, almost blushing, feeling completely adored, and I went into his arms and I kissed him. Well, getting to the circus with a 5-kid dynamic was chaos. We were learning. It was still fun, and I remember realizing internally, with a strange mix of joy and awe, I was already attached to this life. And again, I felt impatience rise. I had to hand it to God. Well, the circus was genuinely fun and also real life. Sibling rivalry, upset feelings, an overstimulated child, sweating in the heat. And yet, Corey and I would look at each other and smile. These moments were something we both knew to treasure. It was such a sweet feeling to experience being a family. But at the end of the day, Esther and I still had to head home to our apartment. Anticipation in my heart was real. I had no idea when Corey would ask me to be his wife. Esther started asking me after every date. Did he ask you yet? You'd think we'd been dating 6 months, but no, she actually started asking me around 10 weeks in. She knew we'd met families, she knew I was ready. But I kept telling her that Corey needed to feel ready, and he didn't just have himself to think of. Esther wasn't the only one hoping. Corey's children were too. There were conversations like, when we live in the same house, then. So anyway, after the circus, it was a weekend, and we planned to go on a picnic together the next day. A picnic to the lake. I remember feeling exhausted that morning. I was flustered trying to pack lunch for everyone. I wasn't used to thinking through food for so many people, but I wanted to do it as a special treat. I wanted to prove that I could do it. But I was running behind. Well, Corey was bringing the kids to us this time, and when he arrived and I wasn't ready yet, I felt stressed. By then, I knew something about Corey. For the most part, he stayed calm when I wasn't calm. Well, after a meltdown from one of the kids, we finally got to the lake, only to realize that it was overly crowded. We had to make an about-face and head to the river instead. During all this, Corey stayed unusually tranquil. I was relieved by this, but also internally spiraling. I remember thinking, he's probably realizing I can't handle this many kids. Well, we walked along the riverbank until we found the most beautiful and quiet spot for our picnic. Relief. The kids were delighted. They started throwing rocks into the little pools near the river, and they were giggling in no time. I was still trying to calm myself, still wondering what Corey really thought of my disorganization, when suddenly he wrapped his arms around me from behind as we watched the children play. I melted against him. I felt utter relief.
Lori?
He said. I turned to face him. He started saying something poetic about life being a dance, and I truly thought he was trying to calm me down, encouraging me to just enjoy being together, just be present. And I have to laugh at myself now because I kept interrupting him, trying to get him to come to the point. I thought he was trying to say that we needed to slow down, so I kept saying, yeah, and... Poor Corey. He was trying to tell me something profound, and I was so tied in knots over my own insecurity, so afraid he'd see how imperfect I was, that I didn't understand what he was saying until he was suddenly down on one knee in front of me. To say I was shocked is an understatement. He proposed right there while our children played around us. It was May 20th, 2017, just 12 weeks from the time we had first met in person. Well, this moment was a beautiful picture of our life at that time, and a foreshadowing. We had found each other in the midst of grief. We had scars. We were single parents, dreaming of giving our children a whole family. Life was messy, and yet, when our lives collided and we looked into each other's eyes, something happened. All the swirling noise, heartache, uncertainty, responsibility quieted, and we were anchored, not in perfection, in each other, and in the sense, step by step, milestone by milestone, that God had been leading. What we'd found was someone we could do messy with. That was a profound and astounding gift. Corey was trying to tell me all of that as he proposed. I cried a few tears, but I was mostly in shock. and incredibly happy. I said yes, of course. The children cheered and told us it was about time. Corey held me in his arms and laughed in his gentle, teasing way at how truly shocked I was. I shook my head at myself. What an emotional wreck I'd been, while he was trying to say something profound about his love for me. I apologized for interrupting him so many times, but he wasn't bothered in the least. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying my shock almost as much as my happiness. I did tell him the ring was beautiful, a stunning choice, and we took a selfie to capture the moment. Then we kissed, both of us trying to absorb the reality that this surreal, beautiful moment had actually happened. I had asked the Lord to bring me his choice. He introduced me to Corey within weeks of that prayer, and within weeks of that introduction, I was in love. And on that day by the river, Corey and I held each other in the joy of knowing that whatever life held, we were doing it together with God's blessing. We had no idea what life would throw at us, but we did know this: love would be present as we found our way through. And in the next chapters, I will tell you what it was like to plan the wedding and then marry the man of my dreams, go on a honeymoon while running my new husband's business, become an instant family, all while external forces try to rival our union. And I'll tell you why our love had to be God-given and unstoppable in order to make it.